Protests have played a very important role in activism in America over the years, specifically the civil rights movement. This includes an array of protests, especially in the form of music. In current times, the women's rights movement also includes protests with some music as well. While music was important in both the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement, music was used more in the civil rights movement. The women's rights movement used music, but it more heavily relied on the use of symbols, whereas the civil rights movement mainly used music. For many civil rights activists, the grueling nature of the movement warranted a means of survival. Santoro's essay discusses the evidence found in William Gamson's research, which investigates the effect of segregationist murders in conjunction with Black protests. This relates back to the main thesis and contributes to our question of how the role of music in protest differs between the civil rights movement to the current women's rights movement, because we need to know what events led up to the civil rights movement that influenced their protest songs.
One of the ways that African Americans coped with the violence and hardships of the civil rights movement was via the use of music. Music played a very large role in the civil rights movement. According to Music in the Civil Rights Movement by Bernice Johnson Reagan, there are countless songs used during the civil rights movement that both unified and empowered activists. In this article, Johnson Reagan discusses the importance of community. The power of the movement was largely due to the numbers held. Thousands of African Americans were fighting for the same thing, equality. In addition, thousands of African Americans were singing for equality. Community played a very large role in enhancing the songs throughout the movement. We interviewed Chandler Frierson, president of the University of Kentucky's chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Here, he describes how he grew up around leaders of the movement and how community impacted him, and the importance of community for the Black community as a whole.
I've kind of been around some of these leaders, John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, when I was really young, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Dr. Bernice King, Martin Luther King Jr. III, and then other leaders like Zernona Clayton and other people from that time period have kind of been around me. So I've always kind of heard stories and stuff like that about the civil rights movement, specifically Dr. King and the nonviolent social change movement that he had from 1955 until he was assassinated in 1968. So that's kind of been my experience and kind of taken under that methodology of nonviolent social change and kind of the different struggles surrounding that movement. So.
Another aspect explained by Johnson Reagan is mass singing. She explains that there was more power in songs when they were sung by many as opposed to the songs sung by one person alone. Mass singing was frequently done in meetings, churches, as well as during marches, which were all integral parts of the movement. Because music was incorporated to all of these, the role music played was enhanced and the songs were spread throughout. Johnson Reagan goes on to explain the different types of songs used during the civil rights movement. Marching songs were usually more cut and dry, and very explicitly stated the feelings and intentions of activists. An example of this is We Shall Not Be Moved, to which the lyrics are as follows. We shall not be moved, we shall not be moved, just like it is planted by the water, we shall not be moved. And if you want. Fellowship and religious songs were more spiritual in nature. An example of this is We Shall Overcome, to which the lyrics are as follows. The different types of songs served different purposes and consequently enhanced the role music played in the movement. Chandler continues to explain how he feels songs such as these serve as beacons of hope for members of the movement, as well as the Black community today as a whole.
Well, I know We Shall Overcome. Like I said, growing up in Atlanta and stuff like that, that was a song that we would sing, and I would hear some of these leaders singing, and seeing these prominent leaders sing this song and be so heartfelt in it. And then when I'm coming to this age and actually listening to the words and listening to what it actually means, I feel like it's a spiritual, so to speak. You start to see the power behind the words of the song and how this was the hope. And then you look at slaves and slave culture and how central to their story music was. So We Shall Overcome, is just a beacon of hope, I think. And We Shall Not Be Moved Is that what you said? That's the song. That's the name of it. Yeah. So I feel like those are beacons of hope for the Black community, especially when you're like in a dark time and stuff like that. When our people are in a dark time, some would say such as this time now, but like we shall overcome is something that is remarkable.
Johnson Reagan, along with the rest of the Freedom Singers, are pictured in this photo from the Library of Congress. The Freedom Singers were a group of civil rights activists who used music as a means of fighting for equality. In this photo, you can see the passion with which they sang freedom songs. The cause of this passion is rooted in the passion they held for the movement. For the Freedom Singers, music and song were paths to freedom. Music empowered them, and singing together united them.
If you fast forward to 2018, you can still see protest music being used in today's women's rights movement. Even though the music isn't one of the central aspects of the protest like it was during the civil rights movement, protest music is still commonly used. As the present women's rights movement grew, it centralized itself with symbolism. Symbols such as the pink-eared hats and the display of the color pink have become focal points that are associated with the protest. To get an idea of what goes on during protests today, we wanted to interview someone that has participated in one of the recent marches. So we talked to Ann Bissoni, a connections coordinator with the University of Kentucky's Work Life program.
Alrighty. Could you explain your familiarity with the current women's rights movement?
My familiarity with the current women's rights. Well, I know that, like after President Trump was elected is when I think I learned more about it, because I have not, I've known about women's rights. I haven't really participated in anything as far as protesting or making big changes or anything like that. It's issues that come up, in my job, but not really something I was super concerned about. And so I think after that, being on Facebook, it kind of was one of those things that just started exploding on Facebook, and everybody was talking about it, and my friends were talking about it. So it was something that we decided to, what can we do?
Yes.
Basically.
Right. Could you share some of your experiences at the march?
Yeah, like I went down, and this was interesting because I went down with 5 friends, and one friend's boyfriend came with us, and we're all white, and I just made a big collage on both sides. Okay. So that part was fun. I was like, woohoo, all right, we're gonna go down there, we're gonna kick some ass, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I did that, but then when we got down there, I was really surprised to see men and women, not just women, but there was not a ton of men, but what I really liked was the women who brought their kids too. And little boys and little girls, and it was packed. And for Lexington, I'm originally from California, where we do these things. Yeah. After Trump won, and everything he was saying about women and second-class citizens, and it felt so lonely at times. Like what do we do with this? What and and it was scary. And in that moment, I know it seems silly, but I compared it to like going to a UK basketball game. Have you been to a game?
Oh yeah.
And you all of a sudden you're like, oh, big blue nation.
Yes,
it's like
it's all together.
yes, and that's what it felt like down there.
That's awesome.
There were people giving speeches. There were just regular citizens. There were teenagers. There were religious leaders, spiritual leaders. Everybody was down there talking, and then they started marching. And I remember we started, and we went down Main Street, and then we turned up on Elm Tree Lane or Rose Street, and then we came back. But at one point, as we were walking down Vine, we looked through, and the people were still going back there. And I just thought, it's a lot of people. Yeah. A lot of people care, And then you looked up, and you looked in front of you, and it was just, it was packed too. And my friend, who was a photographer, she was up on the bridge. And she gave me this great picture. She just took a picture of the crowd. Yeah. And I love that picture because I thought, for once, people stopped talking about it and were doing something. And granted, it was just marching, But it was me, to me, it was like saying, okay, you know, we're not just going to sit here and say, man, that guy's a jerk. You know,
Yeah.
we're going to at least start something. And from that, a lot of things here grew. You know, so it just, I think it made me feel a part of, it made me feel like, okay, I don't just have to sit here and take it,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
That's awesome.
After hearing about Bassoni's experience at the march, we asked if music played any role in the movement, like it would have at a civil rights protest.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So, did music play any role in the march?
Music. I don't remember a lot of music. There was the chanting, of course, you know,
Right.
those kind of things. And I, you know, a lot of that was just a blur. I couldn't really tell you what we were chanting. As soon as I heard it, I'm like, all right, we'll say it, you know. But
Yeah.
I don't remember a whole lot of music. Like, I know for me personally going down, you know, because of course we had to go out to lunch first. We went out to lunch and then we're coming, and you know, I love the Grateful Dead, so that's a song that calms, their music often calms me down, so I know in my car it was. But as far as down there, I don't remember.
Taken by Arden Barnes is of a women's rights protest in Lexington, Kentucky, earlier this year in January 2018. If you look towards the bottom left, you can see part of the pink-eared hat I was referencing earlier. You can also see that some look like they are either chanting or singing. So, as a result of the evolution of protest, music has also had to evolve. Instead of being based on soul or gospel music, today's protest music has taken on the pop era genre. One example of protest music used in women's rights marches today is Milk's song Quiet.
I can't keep quiet. No, I can't keep quiet. No, one minute high.
It is most known for its repetition of the lyrics I Can't Keep Quiet, which people have now begun to use in the rallies to advocate for women's rights. In an Allure interview with Milk, she broke down her lyrics and discussed the reasoning behind writing her song. One of her lines she elaborates on is "one woman riot," by noting that, quote, "it was really important to me because I was practicing standing up for myself and just exposing these sides of me." So music still serves a purpose in delivering a message, but it's not as necessary because of the usage of symbols. In the final analysis of the role played by music in both the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement, one can observe that music was used more in the civil rights movement, whereas the women's rights movement focused more on the use of symbols. It is important to note the role music played in both these movements because music has long been used as a powerful tool in protest. By using music as a means of reaching equality, we are unifying no matter what we are fighting for.